Welcome back to the channel. Last week I went to the BASF launch of Revystar, their new fungicide, and we are members of the BASF Real Results Circle. We were involved with the trialling of the product last year, so I just wanted to go through some of the data we got back from Yen and showed what effect it had on our crops. So the graphs and graphics I'm going to show you in the rest of this video are directly from our Yen report. The grey squares show the middle 50% of Yen values. The red line is the critical value. The blue is what's considered the AHDB benchmark, and the yellow value is our own personal values. Soil health is obviously very important to us, and we're looking for a performance above and beyond the EN average, and we achieved this for both the measures of CO2 burst, which is the measurement of microbial activity. So obviously very pleased with those results. One thing that we haven't done historically on the farm is do much leaf tissue analysis. And one of the benefits we have of getting involved in Yen is that it forces you to get involved in that. So Yen asked us for some regular leaf tissue samples. We went with an early N because it was such a dry year, and this was reflected in a high N reading at growth stage 31. But the high readings of P, K and MAG were as a result of those previous tissue samples that we thought we were a bit low, so we gave the crop an extra top up, which I think shows well both here at the tissue analysis and again at the end in the grain nutrition analysis. Next we come to a plot of crop development, which appears to be around the average for all except crop height, which was impaired by a shortage of rainfall in the April to July period, which we'll see in the next graph. So the next slide covers resources and the plant's ability to capture them, and this backs up the story that the shortage of rainfall in the April to June period versus the Yen average had an effect on our crop. And even though we should have had just enough water, probably the fact that this crop was grown over chalk had a profound effect on the amount of biomass we could generate. But not only that, crop biomass is directly proportional to yield. So it appears that the water shortfall and the lack of June to July solar radiation impaired our biomass production, which, as you'll see from the next slide, had an effect on our yield. Here we get a breakdown of where we lost yield in the yield analysis. So the first line, you can see that our biomass was below the Yen average. So we're already limiting ourselves. Harvest index seems about around the average, but the grain yield in tonnes per hectare was low and below where we would want to be. So we can only conclude that the loss of biomass was the reason that yields fell behind the average. How can we be sure that this biomass loss was the reason for the poor yields? Well, Yen asked us to submit a photo which enables them to count tillers and spikelets in order to identify exactly where in the production cycle yield was lost. The next slide covers grain yield. If grain numbers per metre squared is low, as in our example here, or if conditions during early grain fill are limited, so we've identified that we were short in water and sunshine, then the final grain fill and hence the yield may be constrained even if latter conditions are good. This is sometimes described as sink limitation, and this is what happened to us this year. So grain analysis enables Yen to look into the nutrition of each grain, and as you can see, we are at the top end of average for most of our analysis. So it comes back to that very early point I made earlier, that I think our nutrition was spot on. There were other factors at play during the harvest 2019. So my whole reason for being involved in the Real Results Circle is to get involved with on-farm trials. And last year we trialled the BASF product, hence why I attended the launch of the Revystar product. So these satellite images were taken throughout the year, but they don't seem to show any obvious benefit from the trial plots, unlike some of the other farmers involved in the trial. So I was interviewed by BASF as part of their Real Results road trip, and I joked at the time that their protocols hadn't beaten my farm standard yet. Well, it all ended in harvest 2019 when BASF managed with their new Revystar product to achieve an average of 0.68 tonnes per hectare more than my farm standard, and this was identified through combine yield mapping. So here's the image taken from our combine data and the table showing them beat their yield of 9.71 tonnes per hectare versus my farm standard of 9.03. So I hope you've enjoyed this explanation of Yen, how, what and why we're involved, and how chemical companies can make the claims they do, and more about the farm next week. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, press the little bell. See you next time. Cheers.